What would you do if a girl in a torn wedding dress, soaked in rain, was standing outside your old garage at midnight, shivering, breathless, and looking at you like you were her only chance to survive? Why did she run away on her wedding day? And why did that lonely mechanic, the one who always shut the door to the world, let her stay this time? Come with me as we uncover the truth behind it all. And before the story begins, don't forget to hit subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Rowan Whitaker, a quiet mechanic living in seclusion at Hollow Forge Auto on the edge of Havenmore Creek, hadn't let anyone in since the day his wife died, killed in a car crash on her way to the bakery she loved. He had cleared everything out with his own hands. The tiny kitchen, the old chair where she used to sip her afternoon tea, as if erasing it all could make the pain disappear. But it didn't. It simply went quiet, settling into the corners of his days like the dust gathering on tools he no longer cared to use. That night, with rain lashing against the rusted roof and the dim yellow porch light flickering in puddles outside the garage, he saw her, a young woman drenched, shivering, wrapped in a torn wedding dress. She didn't speak, didn't plead. She just stood there, arms around herself, as if trying to hold her soul together. Her eyes weren't frightened. They weren't desperate. They were empty, so hollow it hurt to look. Rowan didn't ask who she was, didn't tell her to leave. He just opened the door quietly, fetched the driest towel he could find, and placed it near the wood stove, right where his wife used to sit reading in the afternoons. But as he turned away, the girl whispered, "I don't have anywhere to go. I don't even know why I came here. My legs just stopped at this door." Rowan froze. For a moment, something broke loose inside him. He remembered his wife's voice, soft and certain, from years ago. "If someone ever needs shelter under this roof, let them stay, love. Just let them stay." So he did, not out of kindness, but because, for the first time in years, he saw someone lost in the exact same way he once was. Her name was Camille Thorne, a woman once destined to walk down the aisle in a hand-embroidered wedding gown, under chandeliers and flower arches at the $1 million Thornbridge Hall. But instead, she ended that night curled up outside an old garage, trembling with a low fever from the cold. Rowan didn't ask why. He didn't pry. But when Camille began to shiver and murmur through her fever, "Please, don't make me go back," he stayed up the entire night by the stove, watching over her. For the first time in years, he was afraid of losing someone who wasn't even his to lose. The next morning, Camille awoke on an old recliner draped in a thin blanket, listening to the steady hum of an engine being tuned. No one asked her to explain. No one told her to leave. She was simply left in peace. And in that quiet, for the first time in a long time, she breathed like someone who had just learned how to live. She found a small tin box tucked on a shelf. Inside were scribbled notes, a few rusty bolts, and a faded photo. Rowan standing beside a woman with a soft smile. Not a fiancé, not someone waiting for him, but someone who had already gone. Rowan didn't say a word, but when Camille accidentally spilled a cup of coffee across the workbench and stammered an apology, he simply handed her a cloth and gave a small nod. "Just be more careful next time." No blame, no pity, just acceptance. It was something Camille had never known in her life, and she couldn't explain why, only that for some reason, in the quiet presence of this man, she felt safe. Rowan had never been used to having someone stay the night, let alone a stranger in a torn wedding dress, with eyes caught between panic and pride. But he didn't turn her away. There was something about the way Camille curled up with a pillow in the corner of the garage, hands trembling, body pulled inward, that made him think of himself, shaking the same way on another night when everything he loved slipped away. He didn't speak much. She didn't explain much. But every morning, Camille folded her blanket, rinsed the mugs, and made coffee using the old porcelain pot he'd long forgotten on the shelf. They began to share a silence that no longer felt empty, as if their pain spoke the same quiet language. One rainy afternoon, Camille came across the tin box again. Beneath the layer of rust was a faded inscription, "For the one who changed my life." Inside, a photo of Rowan's wife and a handkerchief, delicately embroidered with the initials C. Thorne. Camille froze. Years ago, she had fainted at a quiet bus stop. A stranger had covered her with a soft cloth before vanishing without a name. It had been her, Rowan's wife. Camille stepped out of the workshop, trembling, and handed him the handkerchief. Rowan stared at it, said nothing. He simply turned back to his workbench, removed the old faded photo of his wife, and hung it beside a newer one, snapped without warning, of Camille, smiling, hands smudged with grease. For the first time, their sorrows didn't repel one another. They found each other. Camille couldn't quite remember the last time she did something just for herself, not for her mother's expectations, not for the prestigious Marigold name, and certainly not for a wedding planned down to the final petal. Back in Briarstone Hill, she had been the perfect puppet, smiling on cue, bowing at the right moments, never allowed to falter. But among the scent of motor oil and the hum of Rowan's dusty old radio, she felt something for the first time in her life. She could breathe. She learned to hold a wrench instead of a wine glass, to wipe her hands on a grease-stained rag instead of silk napkins. And one afternoon, with sunlight spilling through the smudged garage window, Camille burst into laughter, seeing herself tangled in a wheel strap, clumsy in her stained gray worksuit. But oddly, it fit her. Rowan saw it, but instead of laughing, he placed a steady hand on her shoulder and said, "No one gets to drag you back to the place that stole your light." That night, Camille wrote a letter. Not an apology, not an explanation, just a single sentence. "I've chosen to live, and I want to live on my own terms, not someone else's script." She folded it, never mailed it. But she knew this was the first time she'd ever written for herself. And as she sat by the fire, hands smudged with oil, eyes quietly resting on Rowan, we understood something unspoken. Sometimes it's not a grand escape, but a single wrench in your hand that finally breaks the loveliest chains, the ones that held your soul captive. One afternoon, while tidying up a long-abandoned corner of the garage, Camille noticed a wooden panel slightly ajar on the wall. When she pried it loose, a tin box tumbled out, dust-covered, scratched, aged by time. On the lid, scrawled in fading handwriting, were just 6 words: "For the one who changed my life." She opened it. There was no money inside, no treasured heirlooms, just small, yellowed slips of paper, each one a thank you note. Simple, handwritten, heartfelt, left by the people of Havenmore Creek. "Thank you for fixing my car the day I had to get to the hospital for my mom. You were the reason I didn't give up that rainy night. I still have the cup of coffee you made when my father died. It was the only thing that made me feel human." Camille froze. Rowan had never said much about his past. Only once, a quiet admission. "I lost someone." But then, tucked between the notes, she found one more. It was hers, written in clumsy, crooked handwriting from years ago, when she was just a little girl. "To the man who gave me and my mom bread that day. She said you were the kindest person in Havenmore." Camille broke down. That loaf of bread, the night they wandered cold and hungry, the man who gave them hope. It had been Rowan, and now, without either of them knowing, he had sheltered her once again. Fate doesn't repeat a story. It offers the chance to finally finish it. Rowan went still the moment he saw the handwriting on the letter Camille had found. He recognized it instantly. This was the note his late wife had carefully tucked away in the tin box all those years ago. But he had never known who had written it, until now. It was Camille, the little girl from that snowy night, huddled beside her mother in the cold. The same girl Eleanor, his wife, had brought a loaf of bread and a still warm flask of tea. He remembered it clearly. That night, Eleanor had said, "Sometimes a single meal at the right moment can hold someone's faith together." What had once seemed like a fleeting act of kindness turned out to be the invisible thread that had bound Camille and Rowan, long before they ever knew each other's names. Camille sat silently, clutching the letter in her hands. "I remember. My mom said the woman's eyes looked so sad," she whispered, voice trembling, "like she'd lost something, but still wanted to keep others from losing more." Rowan didn't respond. He just rose quietly, opened an old cabinet, and pulled out a photo frame layered in dust. Inside was Eleanor, smiling, holding a loaf of bread in her arms. He hung it gently beside another picture. one of Camille's mother, the woman who'd passed away in an accident just weeks after that night of kindness. Two women, two memories, and one life that continued because of them. And for the first time in years, Rowan didn't feel like Eleanor had drifted further away. He felt her presence, quiet and steadfast, still here, living on, through the compassion she'd planted. Camille broke down, not from pain, but from a truth so gentle it made her chest tighten. The man standing in front of her, rough, guarded, gruff in every way, yet somehow always remembering to make her a warm cup of cocoa each night, was the husband of the woman who, years ago, had handed her the only slice of bread on that snowy night. They had never known each other, but fate had quietly sewn invisible threads, weaving her back to the very place where she first felt the warmth of kindness. Rowan watched her cry, not fully understanding why. He only knew that since she arrived, the wooden chair by the fire no longer sat cold each night. The wall clock, once destined for the trash, now ticked again, second by second, as if to say, "Someone is alive here, really alive." And then Camille spoke, not with polished words but with halting breath, cracked memories, and a voice that trembled at the mention of her mother, lost to an accident just weeks after that night of grace. "I used to believe no one remembered us," she said, "but someone did. And you're doing the exact same thing she once did." Rowan said nothing. He just pulled the empty chair a little closer, and Camille sat down without asking. Because for those who've been saved by kindness, there's no such thing as coincidence. Only the moment when a heart finds its way back, exactly when it needs healing the most. From that morning on, Rowan no longer saw Camille as just a stranger who had stumbled into his life. He looked at her as if he were staring into the past, into a memory he'd buried so deep he once believed it was lost forever. This girl with those weathered, searching eyes didn't just remind him of his late wife. She stirred something deeper. For the first time, Rowan felt fear, not of her, but of the possibility that if she walked away, he might lose something fate had taken years to bring back. That afternoon, Camille's old truck, the one she once planned to use to leave town, sputtered and smoked on a rain-slicked road. Rowan could have ignored it, but instead he ran. No gloves, no hesitation. He yanked open the hood as steam scalded his skin and flames licked through his shirt sleeves. All just to keep her there. All just to stop her from disappearing. Camille screamed his name, panicked, breathless. But Rowan looked up at her, eyes steady, voice low. "Your engine's not the only thing that shut down," he said. "So is your heart." And in that moment, she knew. She didn't have to run anymore. Because even when everything else burned down, there was someone still willing to reach out, even when his own hands were still scarred. From that moment on, between them, it wasn't pity, it wasn't duty, it was something fragile, wordless, and real enough that neither of them could turn away. That morning, Camille sat alone at the repair counter, her fingers wrapped around a phone that had been silent for far too long. There was no wedding dress clinging to her now, just a worn mechanic's shirt, faintly stained with grease, and somehow it had never felt more like freedom. Her breath caught. She dialed her mother's number, the woman who had controlled every step, every breath, all in the name of protecting her daughter. For years, every call had been a chorus of apologies, of exhaustion dressed in obedience. But not this time. This time, Camille didn't ask for permission. She just said one thing, slowly, clearly, and with a steadiness she never thought she had. "I'm okay, and I'm going to decide my life. For myself." Silence answered. No yelling, no guilt, no pleading. Just a pause long enough for Camille to understand. This small rebellion was the beginning of something far greater. She ended the call. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from relief. Behind her, Rowan said nothing. He simply placed a cup of coffee on the table, plain and lukewarm. But to Camille, it was the first cup she'd ever tasted after doing something entirely for herself. It wasn't a triumphant victory. It was quieter than that, a shift no one would notice, except her. From that moment on, she wasn't the daughter of the Lovell family anymore. She was Camille, and for the first time, that name truly belonged to her. That morning, sunlight slipped like silk through the dusty windows of the old garage. Rowan was hunched over his bench, wiping down rusted tools out of habit, not in hopes of fixing anything, but to hold on to a sliver of the life he once knew. Camille stepped in quietly, arms wrapped around a square wooden box. Her face showed traces of nerves, but her eyes held something else. Resolve. For you, she said softly, placing the box on the cracked wooden table beside the old radio. Rowan opened it. Inside lay a brand new set of mechanics tools, each one gleaming, engraved with his initials, R.W., Whitaker and Company. Every piece was tucked beside a folded note, handwritten messages from the people of Everfield Hollow. Thank you for helping my mother that snowy night. Thanks for fixing our car when we'd just gotten married and couldn't afford it. Rowan gripped the wrench in his hand. He didn't say a word, but his gaze, steady at first, began to tremble, redden, soften. He had thought he'd quietly faded away, but the good he had once done, things he barely remembered, had never been forgotten. Camille stood beside him, eyes brimming, voice a whisper caught between laughter and tears. I can't fix your heart, she said, but maybe I can help you rebuild the place it once belonged to. The Whitaker garage didn't reopen that day, but for the first time in years, Rowan turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared back to life. Not just the one under the hood, but the one inside his chest. That day, Rowan stood silently before the weathered brick wall at the front of the garage, where the old sign used to hang. Now, only broken wooden beams remained, sagging under the weight of time. Camille approached, a bucket of red paint in her hand. Her clothes were stained with oil, her hair tied back in a loose knot. She handed him a brush, saying nothing. But in her eyes there was something steady, something gentle, the same look she gave him the very first time they met. I don't need my name on the sign, she said softly. I just want this place to have its soul back. And so they began, stroke by stroke, color over pain. Rowan painted the letters with hands that once believed they were only meant to grip wrenches. Whitaker and Company, where second chances begin. Camille stood at a distance watching. She didn't smile. Her eyes were red, not from the wind, but from the truth of that moment. Because in that instant, the man she had come to know chose to believe that the past could be repaired, and the future rewritten. Just then, Camille's phone rang. Her mother, a call she hadn't expected. But this time, her hands didn't shake. She silenced it, slipped it into her pocket, and returned to help Rowan lift the sign into place. The paint hadn't even dried yet, but a soft breeze passed through, causing the wood to sway gently, as if whispering a quiet hello to the beginning of something new. The Whitaker garage hadn't just reopened. It had been reborn. The wedding dress, once heavy with rain and humiliation, now lay folded neatly inside a wooden box, tucked into the corner of the garage beside the first safety helmet Camille had ever been given. That day, for the first time, she wore the gray-blue mechanic's uniform. Her hands still trembled as they reached for the toolbox, but Rowan simply nodded, saying nothing. Then he pointed to an old pickup truck in the back. Want to try changing the oil? Camille crouched down, and amid the clinking of wrenches and the scent of engine grease, something inside her began to loosen. This wasn't just learning, it was reclamation. Every smudge on her hands that day wasn't a stain from running away. It was proof that she had chosen to live on her own terms. From behind, Rowan watched, and without meaning to, he smiled. His first real smile in years. He thought of his late wife, the woman who once dreamed of a place where lost souls could be repaired like engines, not with judgment, but with human hands. And now, in this very garage, that dream was breathing. Camille looked up, grease on her cheeks. Did I mess something up? She asked. Rowan shook his head, voice rough and low. Number, you're starting exactly right. And in that moment, neither of them was lost anymore. Mornings at the garage no longer echoed with the lonely clatter of metal against brick. Now it was the pop of toast from an old toaster, the quiet steam curling up from a forgotten cup of coffee on a grease-streaked workbench. Camille and Rowan didn't talk much. They didn't have to. Between them flowed a quiet language, written in small gestures, a cup of coffee handed at just the right moment, a pair of work gloves always laid out side by side each morning. Once Camille burned the toast. Smoke filled the air. The alarm blared through the shop. She panicked, hands shaking, heart racing, certain she had ruined another place. But Rowan simply walked over. No anger, no scolding. He silenced the alarm, opened the garage door wide, letting the soft morning light pour in. Then he said, "Smoke isn't always a sign of the end. Sometimes it just means it's time to open the door." She didn't say a word, but for the first time she sat down beside him. No heels, just old, worn-out slippers. The silence between them was no longer a void. It was space, a quiet place for healing, a place where two broken people could simply sit, with no explanations, no promises, just the knowing that the other person was still there. And sometimes, in a world that never stops shouting, that kind of silence is what touches the heart the most. It started with an old man named Granger pulling up in a rusted pickup and saying, "She's probably not going to run again, but I'd still like to try." Then came Mrs. Violet. She didn't drive, just brought a warm apple pie and said, "I miss the smell of old engine oil in this place." And slowly, one by one, people returned, each with their own small story, each crack in the old garage quietly patched with a memory, not just of cars, but of something long asleep. The gratitude box on the corner table kept filling. Folded notes, scribbled with shaky handwriting. "Thank you for not giving up that day." And as Camille read them in silence, she realized something. You don't have to know someone's whole story to come back. You just have to believe that it's worth it. Something she had always struggled to believe about herself. One rainy afternoon, a boy, no older than 12, walked into the garage, pressed a scratch coin into Rowan's hand. "I don't have money to fix my bike," he whispered, "but I believe in you." Rowan glanced at Camille, then knelt down and without a word began repairing the bike. And in that moment, Camille understood. This wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a place where people were accepted, even when they had nothing to offer back but a little bit of faith. A place where kindness didn't wait for conditions. A home, not built from bricks, but warmed by memory. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first place Camille had ever truly belonged. One afternoon, while Camille was wiping the last layer of dust from the garage window, a woman stopped by, stood at a distance, watching her in silence. Then out of nowhere she asked, "Do you ever plan to wear a wedding dress again?" Camille looked up. Not with anger, not with defense. She simply smiled, a smile as light as the wind at summer's end, and replied, "I'm wearing my life, and it fits just right." The woman fell silent, because in that moment, Camille was no longer the runaway bride from years ago. She was a mechanic, her hands stained with oil, her jumpsuit worn thin, and her heart stitched back together with trust, every thread woven by her own hand. She had let go of the gowns chosen by others, the flower-strewn paths drawn out for her. And in return, she found something different. Quiet mornings beside a cooling cup of coffee, shared with a man who never made promises, but always stayed. That night, Camille walked into the garage in shoes dusted from the earth, with eyes steady and forward, as if each step declared, "I'm no longer running." At the far table, Rowan was oiling the engine of an old truck. When she approached, he glanced up, nodded gently, and returned to his work. No words needed, because now they no longer required ceremony. They didn't remarry life. They chose to live it again, every single day. And sometimes that choice is more powerful than any vow. That evening, the late sunlight slanted through the dusty glass, casting a soft golden hue across the old scratches and worn corners of the garage. Rowan stood still by the wall behind the counter, holding two photo frames, one old, one new. The first was faded with time. His wife, the woman who had once been the heart and soul of Hollow Forge Auto, her gentle smile and eyes always lighting up whenever she talked about fixing engines. The second was taken just days ago. Rowan and Camille, laughing beside a dented, rust-specked pickup truck. The bumper was chipped, the paint peeling, but their eyes, they glowed with the quiet joy of early summer sunlight. He hung both photos side by side, not to replace one with the other, but to continue the story. Camille stood behind him in silence. She knew this wasn't just a gesture, it was a wordless acknowledgement. After a moment, Rowan spoke, barely above a whisper. She would have liked you. The way you straightened out those messy spark plugs, she'd have loved that. Camille laughed through her tears, because no one had ever said anything like that to her before, that she belonged, even in a place that had once held a love impossible to replace. In that moment, the old garage wasn't just a place for repairs. It became a sanctuary, where hearts once rusted by time could be set gently beside one another, peaceful, whole, and seen. Because sometimes memories don't need to be buried. They just need a space beside new hope to hang quietly and stay. From a rusted machine shop tucked quietly at the end of Elmsworth Hollow, Whitaker and Company became something no one had expected. A home, no flashy sign, no polished reception desk. And yet people still came, not just to fix their cars, but to patch up pieces of their lives. Once an elderly man brought in a car with a broken axle, but when Camille opened the trunk, she found a dusty wheelchair inside, resting beside his late wife's sun hat. She passed last winter, he said softly. I haven't been able to drive this car until today. Rowan didn't charge him a cent. Another time, a boy who'd skipped vocational class rolled in with a beat-up bike, asking for help with the tires. Camille didn't scold him. She just handed over the old helmet she used to wear as a child. That boy came back the next week. And the next. Now he's the best apprentice they have. There's no rule book at Whitaker and Company, but everyone who walks through that door understands one thing. No one asks, what broke you? They ask, where do you want to begin again? This garage doesn't just fix engines. It quietly jumpstarts hearts long thought stalled. And somehow, the place that once stood in ruins became the place where people learned how to put themselves back together, with oil-stained hands and faith, stitched gently, one layer at a time. No one in town ever called Camille a mechanic, and she never needed the title. People just knew that ever since she arrived, the garage lights stayed on longer at night, and Rowan started bringing lunch instead of surviving on cold coffee. They never gave their relationship a name. No one ever said, let's start over. But in the silent glances, in the way they changed spark plugs together, or wiped down windshields in the fading light, everyone could see it. Something was growing, quiet, but steady. One day during a heavy rain, a car was stuck on a flooded road. Camille didn't wait for Rowan's signal. She jumped into the truck, plowed through the rising water, and pulled the stranded car to safety herself. When she stepped out, soaked, hands bleeding from scrapes, Rowan just stared at her. Not because of what she did, but because it had been so long since his heart had been afraid like that, afraid of losing someone. After that, he started saving the half-finished cups of tea she forgot. He'd jot down notes about the little things she tended to drop, and slowly Camille became his gentlest habit, one he never needed to name. But without it, everything felt a little emptier. She wasn't a girlfriend. She wasn't someone new. To Rowan, Camille was the light at the end of the day, never blinding, but always returning, rain or shine. That afternoon, the rain came again, the kind of rain that had become the soundtrack to every turning point in their lives. Rowan was beneath an old truck, his hands slick with oil and grease, when Camille walked in, silent, and gently placed something on the wooden table beside the stove, a silver ring, worn, scratched with a tiny locomotive delicately carved into its band. Rowan started to speak, but Camille beat him to it, her voice steady, yet trembling. It was my old engagement ring. I left it in the dressing room, the same day I ran away from the life I thought I had to live. She looked up at him. There was no pleading in her eyes, only a quiet clarity, soft as a whisper. I'm not asking for promises, But if one day you're ready to move forward, I'm here. No wedding dress, no bouquet, just this ring and you." The room held its breath. Only the rain ticking down the rusted rooftop dared make a sound. Rowan said nothing. He simply slipped off his gloves, sat beside her, and took her hand. His fingers were still stained with grease. Hers were cold as the rain outside. But between their hands, the silver ring lay still, a promise without words. This time, no one was walking away. Rowan said nothing. He simply bowed his head and slowly tightened the final bolt on the nearly finished engine frame. Beside him, Camille sat quietly, her hand still resting in his, growing warmer with each gentle turn of the wrench. No vows, no future plans, just something in the air between them. An old silence, once a wall, now a soft blanket wrapped around two tired souls. Outside, the rain had stopped. A thin beam of sunlight slipped through the cracks in the wooden door, falling across the worn-out toolbox, the silver ring, and a cup of cold coffee. Camille looked at him and smiled. Not out of hope, not out of fear, but with a quiet peace that said, "This is enough." This slow rhythm, these oil-stained scrapes, this moment was enough. No one said it aloud, but they both knew. Someday, that old truck would drive again, not with a wedding dress, not with flowers, but with trust, and two people choosing to move forward together. Have you ever wondered if there's someone in your life who makes you believe enough to not need a single promise? If this story touched something in you, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in second chances, subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking through these journeys of healing together. Because somewhere out there, someone might be waiting to hear this very story. There are moments in life when we don't need a grand, glowing ending, just a place to begin again. Even if it's from pieces we once thought were too broken to mend. Rowan, a man who had lost his faith after the death of his wife, and Camille, a woman once suffocated by expectations and control, found each other at a time when neither had anything left to lose. And somehow, that became the chance to find everything. From an old garage on the edge of town, they rebuilt more than just a roof overhead. They built a place to belong. They didn't come together through promises, but through quiet action. Not with perfection, but with acceptance. No one tried to fix the other, but the simple presence of one was enough to let the wounds begin to soften. Their story reminds us of something simple, yet deeply true. A second chance doesn't need a brand new beginning. It can grow right from the center of what's already fallen apart. All it takes is someone patient enough to sit beside us while we learn how to believe again, the way Rowan did, and the courage to say, "I'll decide my life for myself," the way Camille finally did. Because in the end, family isn't where someone makes you stay. It's the place you choose to return to, even when no one says a word to stop you from leaving. And maybe that's what love really is.